I want to reveal a sort of new concept that I've been playing with, thinking about, and in the future I'm going to start to operate underneath of. All right, but to reveal this, I sort of have to get you in the right mental place. So if you wouldn't mind playing along on a 30-second design challenge with me, I think it'll help us understand how to think about what I'm proposing. Fine, here we go. So I want you to get an operating system in your head, a computer operating system. Hopefully you know what I'm talking about when I say an operating system. And if you do know what I'm talking about, you know that this one is probably not very good. So I want you to put an operating system that we all lived with. Here's Windows XP. We lived with this operating system for quite a while. I want you to get that in your head. Now I want you to equate that operating system to the school system, okay? Operating system, school system, same thing. Put those two things together in your head, all right? That school is an operating system. Fine. So if you could upgrade that operating system, what would be different? Give it a think. I'm going to give you 10 seconds. Come on, what would be different? So surely a few things came to mind. If they didn't, then you need to go jump into a school building, ask the principal, they'll be nice to you, I promise. Ask to spend a bit of time in the building, getting to know what's going on, and if you spend some time in schools, you'll know that, whoa, there are some pieces of this operating system that are not very efficient and certainly not optimal. Okay, fine. Let's propose the same question in a couple of different ways to sort of have us think about, well, what if school was an operating system? When was the last upgrade to that operating system? And we can frame it state by state, so here is Kentucky's. When was the last upgrade to the operating system in Kentucky? Well, I think if you had to push a Kentuckian, they would say in 1990 with Kara. That is, of course, 26 years ago at this point. And that, while I do think it was certainly an upgrade to the operating system, it is pretty far removed in the consciousness of most educators today. And just generally, even if Kara was an upgrade, and think about your own state if you're not in Kentucky, what version of the operating system of school are we on in your particular state? You know, Windows is about to release or has just released Windows 10. I think we're dealing with Mac OS 10. Are we on version 10 of the operating system of school? I doubt it, right? Maybe we're on operating system 3, maybe 4 here in Kentucky. I don't know. Something like that. Okay, but all that context I want wrapping up in your head as I sort of propose what I see as the big task for us going forward. And this big task has been emerging for me as a slow hunch that's been developing over the last decade or so. We've been doing the Next Generation, just finished year 5 of the Next Generation Leadership Academy here in Kentucky, STEAM Academy that I've spent time at developing this idea where they've allowed me to really get into the mechanical workings of a high school. It's 3 years old at this point. We have some data about how it's doing, and that's been fascinating. All right, all that has been building, for me, a very slow hunch around this question. What is my, or perhaps our, task? At a very macro level. At a very macro level. Of course we're going to educate children. Of course we're going to do that. But how we do that task, how we achieve the big picture goal of learning for each and every child, I think is a big question. And what is our job relative to these systems, these historical systems that we were grown up in and that we have grandfathered into operating? What is our task around those things? And so here, I think, is the task. We, as a generation, we have to recode the school system. And ultimately, we have to upgrade that operating system, okay? And I'll get back to that upgrading of the operating system in a moment, but I wanted to look at these two words just for a second, recode and school. And let's start with school, okay? Let's start with school. I'm going to look at these 4 pieces, and we're going to get back to our analogy, and I'll frame up a task for all of us. But first, school is not equal to a place, all right? Now, I think we as educators, if you're an educator, you know that, but I do think many parents are making that mental equation in their head, that school is a place, and that we name particular places Dunbar High School. We're naming a place, but what is it that is operating in that place? That is a school. School, I think, is more interesting than that. We know this at STEAM Academy because we have been operating in the building of Johnson Elementary for the last 3 years, and we'll continue to operate there for another couple of years at least. That has really allowed us to mentally detach these two things. School as different than a building. All right, I actually think the more I have pondered, I've given this a lot of thought. People do disagree with me on this thought, and you're free to disagree with me also, that I think school ultimately is a technology. I'm pretty sure it is, but you certainly can think about that. I mean, obviously, when we think of the word technology, we think of things like, our little digital devices, perfectly fine. I got my Fitbit updates. There's a new technology, right? But more fundamentally than that, technology is something that tools that humans create. And so for us in schools, learning, of course, is that extremely human experience, but schooling is sort of the delivery technology of that human experience, right? It's a delivery technology that permits for teaching in those spaces, and all with this broad goal of learning. But how do we achieve learning at scale for tens of millions of kids? That, I think, is why we've created the technology of schooling as we know it today. Fine, I'm not the only one that has come up with these kinds of equations. There's other people out there. Ira Sokol, who's a great educator out of Virginia, is a great person who's been thinking about this recently. But someone that thought about this not super long ago, Neil Postman, for instance, says in the book The End of Education, as he sets up what are we trying to do in schools, he spends most of that book looking at the metaphysical problem and somewhat ignoring the engineering problem. But he lays out that school is a technology, and that adults have an engineering task to build a technical system that achieves education of the youth, right? So I think those earlier educators give us some sense that schooling itself is a technology. Fine, if it is a technology, that has implications. Let's jump back to it. I want to look at this concept of code for just a second. Okay, I am heavily influenced by Larry Lessig's ideas around code. And his book, Code and Other Laws of Cyberspace, for instance, is a big piece of this, but many of his own lectures have really contributed to my thinking here. In his lectures, he lays out a slide that looks essentially like this. Code is composed of different regulatory mechanisms for human societies: markets, architectures, norms, and laws. All right, and that these four components are constantly interacting to help regulate how we function as a society. Okay, perfectly fine. I think for some of those that makes sense. I think that like a building code around an architecture, that makes some sense. Ultimately, there's a school code that's a set of laws. That makes some sense to us, I think. Even when you think of technology, there's coding the technology underlying. That's a really fascinating concept to me. I'm not going to dive super deep in this video, but the coding of school is a really fascinating thing. All right, let's check these out real fast. Okay, markets, of course, we are subject to markets as schools more than you probably think as a public school educator, but certainly we have lots of charter schools like the Summit Public Schools out in California that they are purely market-based endeavors. Parents have to want to go there, and they're competing in a marketplace for parents' choices around children. Fine. There's architectures everywhere in our school buildings. Everything that is engineered is an architecture. Okay, and almost everything when you look around, you see things that are engineered, and lots of things you don't see, like software, are engineered. Those are all, of course, architectures that we live inside of. There are, of course, laws. This is my favorite statute, by the way, in the whole wide world. and lays out the goals of CARA, the last operating system upgrade, in my opinion. The foundation of that operating system upgrade was laid out in this statute, 158.6451. My favorite statute, but of course we have all of those laws, and we have lots and lots of norms, right? Norms between kids and teachers, and norms between teachers and leaders, and norms between leaders and parents, and just norms everywhere. All right, we have those, everything. Now let's apply those to schools real fast. The markets underlying schools, they influence things massively. The real estate market, for instance, is a massive driver of schools. Parents are making choices about school quality in their real estate decisions. We know this. We know that it leads to crazy things like de facto segregation in our society, but those markets are heavily influencing our school system. This image happens to be of Beechwood Independent here in Kentucky, which is a very elite public school in northern Kentucky by Cincinnati, who has some of the top scores in the state, but their district boundaries only really include really high real estate homes. Fine. Architectures, teachers are engineers themselves. They are constantly engineering things. Anyone that has built a school master schedule knows that that is really an engineering challenge, and each teacher is taking on engineering challenges when they're building out their lesson plans. They're structuring time, they're allocating resources, all those kinds of things. Fine. In schools, these laws, they translate into policies. I don't want to get into great detail on that right now. And norms, of course, I think what we call these in school are our rules, okay? Now that's a big thing. That's a really big distinction there. Notice that I said that laws, I think we translate as policies, and norms, I think in schools, we translate as rules. So when someone makes the statement that's against the rules, in my experience, what they actually mean most of the time is that's against the norms. Very rarely does the statement against the rules actually mean against the laws. Okay? That has huge implications, as my friend Buddy Barry said in one of our Next Gen meetings. All the time he hears as a superintendent when he's out there innovating, you can't do that, that's illegal. Well, I talk to other people and they also think it's illegal. But then Buddy says, did you actually read the law? Because I did, and it's not illegal. There's a difference, right? And educators massively struggle with this difference between laws and norms. All right, so one of the recommendations I'll get to in the end is how we deal with this. Fine. That is the underlying code, those pieces. And we could go into great detail on those pieces and how they're interacting. But that code underlies what I think is the operating system of school. Fine, let's get back to that analogy then. School as an operating system. Now think about an operating system real fast. Do you spend much time ever really thinking about Windows XP? Do you spend a lot of time thinking about Mac OS? No, most of the time we spend thinking about the programming that runs on top of that, the software that's running on top of it, Microsoft Word. We don't really even think that much about Microsoft Word, but that's the thing that we click on. We don't even really click on the operating system. It's purely in the background most of the time. That, I think, is what's going on with school at a structural level also. Very much of the thing that we call school operates fully in the background. You don't see it. We've got STEAM Arts Night tomorrow night, and I'm excited about that. And we're going to see all the students' artwork, and we're going to maybe even translate to this artwork came from different courses across our school. We're going to think about those courses, okay, that to me is a program that we're going to think about. But very few people are going to take that next step and think about the underlying structural model of STEAM Academy that allowed for those programs, that allowed for that artwork to emerge. Okay, that I think there's several levels down. There is a layer of structure that functions like an operating system in schools. All right, awesome. Now, those big four factors, they also influence our operating system in schools. They decide how things operate. And of course, there's lots of different operating systems, and I think there are lots of different structural models for schools. You don't have to be this 100% traditional public school, right? That model is sort of like the Windows of education. It is the base model that most everyone uses. Some people choose a different operating system. There is a Montessori operating system. That's sort of maybe like Linux of the operating system world for those that actually play deeply with operating systems. Sort of this side crazy thing that's sort of in a freemium space, weird stuff going on. There is an entire Catholic operating system that operates out there. We have different operating systems, just like computers have different operating systems, but all of those operating systems are making big assumptions and massively controlling the structure of schooling. And I actually think, just like the operating system that's on your computer, it is updated pretty frequently. All right, I think certainly on a yearly basis, probably on a monthly, maybe even daily basis, the operating system of public education is updated. I think that's something like, maybe equating to Mac OS 10.4.6.2.1. And then the next day 10.4.6.2.2. Some very, very small update, but mostly everything stays the same. I want to posit that an update, though, is not equal to an upgrade. All right? Those two things are very different things. Updates don't change the underlying model. All right? Now, look, Mac, when they talk about upgrades and updates, they make this exact distinction. This is copied directly from Mac's page. When they say the word upgrade, they mean something specific. When they say the word update, they mean something else specific. Okay? Both of those things are working on the operating systems that they're releasing, but upgrades are more infrequent and fundamentally alter the user experience, right? I think that is getting deep into what is going on here. Update is simply trying to improve the user experience with the current system, whereas an upgrade is intended to change the current system itself, right? And that, I think, is the space that's really interesting to us as educators, as reformers, perhaps. So what does an upgrade feel like? How would we know that the system is being upgraded? Well, I think at the school level, we can look at some innovative schools out there, like Summit Public Schools, which here in Kentucky we're starting to invest heavily in. When they allocate time quite differently, and students are sort of experiencing a quite different experience in the school day, that feels like an upgrade, not an update to the current model. Okay, that's a different model. That is an upgraded model, in my opinion. And there's lots of things about Summit we could go into that I like, but ultimately they're trying to upgrade the system of schools. That's interesting. I think public schools can do this on their own. Buddy, who I referenced earlier in this presentation, is a superintendent at Eminence. Eminence is a district that, on their own, without sort of public support through a group like Summit or something, has made a decision to upgrade their system, not just update it. Their school board has gotten on board. They've hired for the purpose of upgrading, not just updating. And ultimately, after now 5 years of innovating in Eminence, they have a very different system than they had 5 years ago. What about upgrading an entire state? What does that look and feel like? For us here in Kentucky, I think that looks and feels a little bit like CARA, but even then with the Kentucky Education Reform Act here in Kentucky, while it gets pointed to globally as one of the profound moments in public education, it still left many pieces of the existing operating system in place. So I think it looks and feels like CARA, but I think we can go further than CARA, perhaps, in sort of a more robust update to the system. That, of course, brings us to the task. And I know this video is running long, so I won't linger. To contextualize the task, though, here in the year 2016, you have to understand that no one really knows what to do with public schools. That's what I'm getting. The federal government, after the era of No Child Left Behind, is largely wiping its hands of public education. They realize, I think, in Washington that they cannot test their way to great schools, nor can they try to bribe their way to great schools. I think ultimately they understand that states will have to want to have great schools on their own. Now that that has turned to states, though, here in Kentucky in the year 2016, what our state is doing is listening. That's a good thing. I love that they're listening to what's important, but listening and structuring a plan to upgrade the operating system are two separate things. I think that creates a moment in time that's interesting for you as a school leader to take the reins, lead, do it, go. Now is the right time. Not from a rah-rah, structurally, legally, now is a really good time to lead an operating system upgrade. Seek those transformative upgrades to the underlying technology of schooling, right? Go for that. When you're saying, hey, we're going to think about doing this new thing, is that a transformative upgrade to the underlying technology of schooling? Is it sustainable? Does it change the user experience of the kid? Those are good questions to be asking yourself. Understand, huge point for innovators to understand. Most of the code of public education in the United States is built on norms, not built on laws, okay? To change a law, you usually need permission. To change a norm, you need buy-in. Those are two different approaches to change. And I feel too many school leaders feel that they're held back by laws and they seek permission, but really they're held back by norms and they need to seek buy-in. Two different approaches. Understand, norms drive schools way more than laws. Okay, last task. If I could do nothing else for the public schools in my lifetime, I may leave public, I would maybe find something else to do with my career if I felt that education took ownership of its own profession. I feel way too much of public schooling is being dictated by outsiders, and some of that is necessary to a functional democracy, but much of it is not. A lesson of No Child is we cannot have legislators try to test their way to great schools. It doesn't work. It leads to the mess that we're in today. If we are to build a great American education system, it has to come from within. That moment to take ownership of our own code of schooling, to take ownership of the core technology of schooling, we can do that if we want to. And the moment is available to us right now. If we do it, that I think is how you build a profession. That I think is what a profession is. It's a group of individuals. It's I don't even know how to not use the word when you think of the professions out there. It is a group of people who do the same task that own that task for society. They self-regulate. They self-update the code. The American Bar Association is not a governmental entity. It is a professional entity and they take ownership. They update the operating system of the legal system. They set professional norms, professional rules. We have to do that. If we want to pretend that we want to go be Finland, this is what Finland did the hard work. They took control of the profession and they leave it to the educators. Let's do that. To do that, we have to take control of the code of the technology of schooling. Grab it. This is the moment. Thanks for playing along. For everyone that has played along to help develop these ideas around recoding school, through the Next Gen Academy, through STEAM Academy. Thanks for helping me put these ideas together. You're going to hear a lot more from me over the coming years around the concept of recoding school, but here's that initial foundation. I hope you find it interesting. Happy to talk more on Twitter @EdJurist or anywhere else. Hit me up. Thanks for listening.